Well, good evening, everybody. Well, welcome to all of you here in person, keeping the room warm for the larger audience that is constituted mainly by people out there on the live stream. Welcome to you too, wherever you may be. We are very much in this place of Green College now. Earlier this afternoon, when Sonnet and I walked in here, and Sonnet has lived in these spaces before. Sonnet said to me as we came into the coach house, "It smells just as it did." And we looked at each other and said, "It's the wood." And it is. It's the wood. It's the wood in the furniture. It's the wood in the floors. It's the wood in the beams. It's the wood that is all around us. The fence of the principal's residence garden was repaired this afternoon with two new beautiful panels of cedar. Go and smell them on your way out. It will extend your life and enrich your day. So many reminders that what we are breathing in and enjoying in this space has been breathed in and drawn out in conversation and song and story for many, many centuries before the likes of most of us came into these parts. We are on the traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of the Hunkaminam-speaking Musqueam people. These are their woods. This is their wood. It's their conversations that we have, blundered in upon. It's their rhythms that we're trying at some distance and with many a misstep to pick up and to feel. And we have special help this afternoon, thanks to, once again, Margaret Christakos, whose series, Distance as a Keeping, this evening's event, and its sequel, about which some of you are in the know, completes. Distance as a Keeping. 3 parts, each part overflowing. If you've been there on the live stream, or that's the only way to have been in the room until now.
That's right.
You'll know what I mean. We have been out of the box so many times already with Margaret. It's beginning to feel like a habit. And there will be another opportunity to join Margaret here at Green College and at large on Tuesday, the 12th of April, which will be the inaugural event for this inaugural Meredith and Peter Quartermain residency for a poet at Green College. And on the 12th of April, we're going to have a big shout out for Meredith and Peter, but maybe we just need to rehearse by having a bit of a shout out now. Could we have a rousing cheer for the Quartermains? Now, I think it's only right, given the kinds of mandate that the Quartermains gave for this poet in residence, that we should have the inaugural event at the end of Margaret's residency here, just as she actually began her residency here in Toronto on Zoom in November. It's the kind of...
Yes, full circle.
The kind of perversity that I think Peter and Meredith mean to keep encouraging. Good. Enough by way of manifesto. I will now turn things over to Margaret for the next Keeping in Distance as a Keeping. Margaret Christakos.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad that Meredith and Peter are here. Very lovely to see you. And Kevin from Talon Books is here, so that's lovely. And friends, Penny, Nancy, you're here. It's really going to be a lovely evening. There's several parts to tonight. I'm going to start off with a short text. By short, I mean about 8 minutes, so it's not all that short. And then at that point, we're going to have presentations from our 2 guests tonight, Sonnet L'Abbé and Nicole Raziya Fong, who will come up to the table perhaps after I finish my comments. Would that be all right? Yeah? Added advantage is you can have your mask off here if you would like. So thanks very much for everyone coming. I'm going to talk a little bit about the themes that I have found in the work of Sonnet and Nicole, and I'll meander a little bit with this short paper as an introduction. So I've been thinking about how poetry projects arise. When does the act of writing a single poem expand to a thesis that entails writing a whole body, for example, of connected poems? Both of the books we'll be hearing about tonight by Sonnet and Nicole were developed as book-length projects and can be read as continuous investigations that unfold from front to back and then invite a hopscotch, multi-directional rereading. Both works establish a discernible first-person subject whose circumstance seems to lead us through the text, but this central I equally suggests a multiplicity and mobility of what we might think of as co-present selves. A clustered or polyvocal effect arises from both books. In this way, it can't be said that the I of either book is a protagonist. Instead, these books of poetry both seem to want to think about the self as a kind of staging, a phenomenology of becoming. Now, I'm just going to talk a little bit about sound and attention, which is one of the sort of media I'm quite interested in my own poetics, and which I think are interactive with the work we'll hear about tonight. So as a poet, I've been interested in distance as a listening, let's say in a practice of environmental listening that focuses the attention on place-centered sonic phenomena. And this might include noticing co-present vocal, corporeal, ambient, dramatic, synthetic, and machinic sounds, all happening at the same time at different depths of the acoustic field. Distance is a keeping of many voices present at once, for there is no such thing as silence. John Cage demonstrated how in an anechoic chamber one still feels and hears a great racket of the body itself, the breath and the pulse surging. This biological pulse and breath, sort of amphitheater permeate our listening at all times. We're just not aware of it. We don't take it into account. Instead of the overused fiction of silence as a good thing, here one can hold the complex bed of sound that emanates from our own bodies and, of course, through our cultures, among that of all living ecosystems, which entices us to consider all the other layers of sound that compose consciousness, that signal aliveness. This place-referenced, process-focused activity feels active and sensational and enlivening. For one thing, it displaces the primacy of vision and our concentration on the visual and lets the other senses gather both near and distant information. Just take a moment to listen. Deep listening as a practice, evolved by the composer and experimental musician Pauline Oliveros, is based upon being widely attuned to the present moment, in place, trying to hear everything all at once, becoming absorbed in the simultaneity of the many auditory events going on all the time. A non-linear surround of sound becomes noticeable and in some sense named, brought into conscious mind. Here one's place in the world becomes more linked to placement, habitat, an auditorium of belonging, or being aware, too, of being a guest. The borders of the physical body can seem to dissolve, allowing for a transit of sound inside the mind, inside the body, and outside of both. The ways that we hear our own voice inside our head, as memory even, regardless of whether there is visible light or not, seems one of the sources of poetry and composition itself, the place from which ideation and image emerge into poetic material in the voice or on the page. Listening also opens the notion of memory as an incantatory polyvocal capacity across generations, connecting the living and the dead. Instead of undifferentiated noise that lacks or scrubs away meaning, paying attention to co-present voicing creates a vital kind of field music through which to hold and even celebrate complexity and difference. So now back to this evening in particular. Incantatory recomposition feels to me like a tactic of claiming back space that has been the domain of the privileged by those who have been marginalized or dispossessed from it. It takes determination and repetition over time to mobilize. It may require a kind of hypnotic internal vocalization that gains the potency of a hex. To recompose is to attend to a gesture that must be done again and again to fix or rebalance or adjust access, stewardship, agency. But how to move in and reclaim? This is a question for the poets tonight. Ebenezer Phillips Zong is a brilliant, now very well-known example of contemporary poetry that takes a colonizer's text and puts its contents to use under the redistributive textual pressures of redaction and erasure. The historical denotations of a white British lawyer's case law text are broken open to create poetry as an active witness and nominalization for Black African slaves grievously drowned as cargo. As the work progresses, more and more voicing becomes present on the page, every syllable rising up like breath, creating an ocean of transgenerational sound and Black presence. And Nishka writer Jordan Abel, in his procedural poetic work, The Place of Scraps, used the colonizer's archive of ethnographic descriptions and definitions of Nishka totem poles, hewn by Quebecois cultural anthropologist Marius Barbeau from decades of on-site fieldwork to glean the cultural knowledge about his own nation that he had not had access to. Abel's process is an example of what Greg Betts coined as plunderverse. Both Zong and The Place of Scraps use compositional processes of redaction and erasure to crack apart and aerate the colonial text, generating a release of recomposed subjectivity. Well, Sonnet L'Abbé and Nicole Raziya Fong strike me as similar in that they situate the poetry we'll be discussing tonight in relation to canonical works of Western literature and philosophy, not to reify and reinscribe these works as authoritative, of course, but to unhinge and open from those precursors their own contemporary theater of resistance, respin, and audacious recomposition. Instead of a process that erases, however, that uses erasure and redaction, both writers trade in varietals of exceeding, of overfilling, and overwriting. In her book, OЯACULE, Nicole creates an experimental dramatic play script that interacts with Plato's Theaetetus on the nature of knowledge and figural subjects from classical tragedy and Homeric epic, as well as engaging with works of contemporary philosophy. The esoteric quality of abstraction Nicole manages creates a startling disorientation that is both haunting and provocative. In his afterword to OЯACULE, Andy Martrich refers to Nicole's enfoldment of notions of belief from Pasolini's Medea, where the film proposes Medea's murder of her children as a kind of sacrifice to the sun and earth to regain spiritual reconciliation, without weighing what Andy points out that Nicole suggests are the duplicitous properties of light and its reflections. The dramatis personae of her operatic opus includes the painted woman, the grotesque heroine, the dissociated child set in indecision. Her libretto interweaves lyric expressions of dreams, theatrical dialogue, songs, and the voices of both chorus and anti-chorus, potentializing poetry as a stage space of reimagination. In their collection, Sonnets Shakespeare, so let me just say this is OЯACULE, beautiful book from Talon Books, and Sonnets Shakespeare. In Sonnet Shakespeare, Sonnet L'Abbé uses a mesmerizing process of hyper-overwriting onto Shakespeare's 154 sonnets to entirely reclaim for their own uses a radically present subjectivity, insisting on continuing the process until Shakespeare's original poems are immured into what feels like an entirely decomposed field of so much mulch-like fertilizer. Sonnet creates and applies a procedural compositional constraint that each of their poems will contain the entirety of Shakespeare's original sonnets text, splintered and atomized often to just single letters and syllables. And I happen to have brought a poster that was made when the book was launched, which shows you, and you'll be able to come and have a look at it up close, but it actually shows you the way that the Shakespeare text is completely atomized and buried within the new poem. So it's not a matter of treating words as units, it's a matter of treating word spaces and single letters and syllables as units. Really very, super intense. And in the book, several other examples are given in the book showing some of that gray space, which indicates something about the sort of intensity of the project. There's no deceit here. The sort of promise of the project is that every sonnet will be treated this way, and then in fact it is, with a lot of creative variation. Jordan Abel wrote about Sonnets Shakespeare. L'Abbé's conceptual engagement with colonial history urges us to consider how deeply internalized and invisible colonial structures can be, while also being both an incredibly funny and dazzlingly inventive book, which indeed it is. The shape of Sonnet's poems mostly remains limited to the single page space occupied by the source sonnet, although her overwriting replaces the crisp 14-line rhyming economy of the sonnet with flowing, full-sentence-based prose. Still, across the series, there's a startling range of affect and register, from formal to scatological, as well as gestures of ode, of memoriam and allyship, and poems that comment introspectively on the project itself. Sonnet's recompositions situate their narrator in concrete local places, the Earth Science Building at UVic, rainfall in the Amazon canopy, waiting for a sign-in from a potential online date, at a Kawarthan cottage negotiating settlers' complicities, editing an entry for Fred Moten on Wikipedia, about Fred Moten on Wikipedia. Nicole seems to work lyrically, composing a poetic sensorium full of echoing fragments and voicings, often glistening with perception's potential for deceit or slippage. It seems there are two primary forms or shapes of poems in OЯACULE. One is the first-person soliloquy by the subject who is not one, named Luminous, who is a star, who delivers a lengthy address that seems directed at the audience, involving us in dramatic relation. The second form or shape is the dramatic theatrical scene, which presents us with a cast of characters involved in interactions that we as audience are observing. Here we can position ourselves as sitting at a distance from their disembodied exchanges, while also seeming to drift into the inner sanctum of psyches negotiating identity and relationality. OЯACULE, for its part, seems a rotating catalog of spaces, places, architectures, in fact, stages upon which then acts of perception, movement, dream, and sensation are played out. It reminds me of the way B.P. Nichol and Anne Carson have frequently talked about the multi-directional entwinements of exits and entrances. Yes, the spaces in OЯACULE are often dreamlike and shifting, with fields and gardens and flora, and the city with its walls, its roads, facades, doors, and shelves. We seem lifted off from the present here to a temporality both past and future at the same time. This past 2 years has short-circuited the literary readings world across the country, across the world, with many collections of poetry sliding far under the radar with the onset of the pandemic. We all know this. We've all missed it. Sonnet's book was published in 2019 and should have received so much more attention. Nicole's book appeared in 2021, and run right out and pick one up tonight. This evening, I feel very lucky to be gathered here to enjoy 25 to 30 minutes with each of Sonnet and then Nicole, and then followed by some time for discussion and conversation. I've asked them to perhaps consider how it is that a poetics of polyvocality, of mutual attention, and of spaciousness may relate to their work, as these are some of the interests of my own poetics right now. And as well, it will be interesting to hear about some of the tactics they explore toward what might be called a subversive and or decolonial approach to canonical lyric texts, or at least approaches that center the subjectivity, perceptions, desires, and agencies of women-identified, non-binary, queer, and racialized subjects. So I'm just going to now share with you the bio for Sonnet L'Abbé. Sonnet L'Abbé, they, them, their, writes in the intersections between word, race, species, song, gender, and place. They are the Takaranto-born, mixed-race, Black, Indo-Caribbean, and Quebecois child of Ghislaine Jason L'Abbé and Janet Raymond L'Abbé, and author of the poetry collections A Strange Relief, Killarno, Anima Canadensis, and Sonnets Shakespeare. Sonnets Shakespeare was a finalist for the Dorothy Livesay Award and the Raymond Souster Award, and Quill and Quire called it the most audacious volume of poetry to appear in 2019, naming it Book of the Year. In 2021, Sonnet played their first solo show as a singer-songwriter in the Port Theatre's Discovery Series. They live on Snuneymuxw territory on Vancouver Island and teach creative writing and English at Vancouver Island University. So please help me welcome Sonnet L'Abbé. Great. Have a seat. You want to sit in the middle and I'll sit at the end?
Hello, everybody. So I'm going to speak into the mic. I'm going to balance books and microphone back and forth a little bit. Thank you so much, Margaret, for inviting me to be here and for your particular questions around sound and polyvocality. Trying to speak with the way that I respond to that is like trying to speak from a place of understanding the self to be overdetermined, right? I have a little bit of a frustrated relationship with my sense of having been cultured and taught to be literate and expressive in English, and the values of the English language that carry the colonial values of the land and people that came and settled here, having that as my basic language. Like if I get annoyed with someone, I'm still using English to tell them off. And so, yeah, thank you for inviting me to think about sound and its relationship to how the sounds of coloniality and the sounds of intelligibility both sit in my body. So I thought I would give a little bit of context for how I came to the procedure that Margaret explained to you for Sonnets Shakespeare. And so my first book, like I went to university, read some poems, was like, oh, this is really cool. I like expressing myself this way. This seems to work, and was finding some satisfaction in expressing myself in poetry, and wanted to do it right, and wanted to do it in a publishable way. And so, as a good student, right, a very well-disciplined student, I took books out of the library and I looked up all of the Governor General's award-winning poetry books, and that's also very we've got the coloniality right there. It's the Governor General's award-winning books, and read them for sound, read them for their tone and their cadence. And I, from what I had seen in my university experience, as long as I put my racialized experience into my writing, it was going to get received in a way that I also have some problems with, because in some ways it was like, oh, good for you. You wrote your difference. But then at the same time, as a prof myself now with racialized students, I do want to encourage them to write in ways that give space to voices that are not necessarily just erasing their own difference from Eurocentric traditions. So I thought, if I just write in this sound, I'll write my experience in this sound and I'll get published. And that was the case. That's what happened. I translated everything into this particular kind of music, and my first book got published. And so after that, I was like, what did I just do? Like, what's the relationship of my urge to express, which, if I'm thinking about trying to use language to connect with people and to think about belonging, think about feelings, why is it that I'm somewhat unsatisfied with what I've done? And at the time I thought, well, it's because this cadence and this, the mode that seems to be valued here, and I didn't know a lot about experimental poetics at the time, I'll be clear, more as a lyric poet, I have taken that mode is contemplative and has the romantic traditions of being able to have the leisure time to sit back and think about the trees, and it just seemed like it was a lot of looking at one's garden or lake and thinking. And I had a lot more urgent things to say, so I felt as though the sound had maybe domesticated the rage or the difficult emotions. So then I wrote another book just trying to sound my own way. And that produced my second book, Killarno. I will read you one poem from that, just to give you a sense that I've been interested in sound for a while. Tone is an important part of any class text. Ask your professor if you may say, "No way," to object, or "Hey," to interject, in any essay meant to earn respect. You can't say, "This dude knows his shit," nor can you say, "He's full of it." To argue your point, your joint gotta have vocab game. However, and nonetheless, kick butt's ass. Address to impress, your convention hall pass. The rules of tone are all unspoken. One learns the hard way how they can be broken. Okay, and so this book thinks a lot about sound and has different phonemes like ah and o and broken down for what I was examining as their meaning, and moves into some other syllables that like za. My mother's middle name is Zalina, and that's a Muslim name. And at the time, I was thinking about life post 9/11 and how I was seeing myself in those years after that, and feeling as though that za, all one had to do was hear that za, and suddenly I was received differently. So I thought a lot about that in this book. After that, I was like, okay, I did that, and still was thinking through trying to express in English, and was also very informed by Nerbese Philip. Particularly, she tries her tongue, her silence softly breaks. In which she has a poem that goes, anguish, anguish. English is a foreign language, a foreign anguish. And she talks about mi mudda tongue, mi fada tongue. And the way that her incantation / repetition, her African rhythms to try to express that connection with non-European ways of being that still want to express and know, has informed me greatly. So that combined with some erasure poetics was happening at the time that I was thinking about this project. There were a number of poets who were using found material in a very found material way, as if the source text were just material and not culturally inflected. So I'm glad that you mentioned Abel and Nerbese as really thinking about the source text as opposed to just using it as raw material. So I thought, if I'm going to do that, I thought about erasure as well, and silencing, and the way that coming to speak in a certain diction, in a certain tone, has been my pass into communities, rooms, and I speak my own legitimacy by being able to be conversant in certain jargons or in certain tones. And that was what I wanted to push against, and so I chose the Shakespeare sonnets for their as iconic of the British texts that were used to discipline generations of English teachers and English professors, and because of the way that the texts shaped me, because I found a copy of Shakespeare's sonnets on my dad's bookshelf. He had not really cracked it. It was from high school, but I studied them because it had my name on it. The Jason, S-O-N from Jason, N-E-T from Janet, makes sonnet. So that word play is there in my name, and I've identified with these poems for a very long time. So, this poem does a bit of positioning, and I sometimes read without giving the Shakespeare sonnet that is overwritten, woven through it, but because we're talking about polyvocality, and because I was thinking about the way that I want to speak with, speak in the place of, all at the same time, I'll read this to you, and perhaps you'll be able to hear some of the ways that the original text sits within my own text. So this is Shakespeare's Sonnet 42. That thou hast her, it is not all my grief, and yet it may be said, I loved her dearly. That she hath thee is of my wailing chief, a loss in love that touches me more nearly. Loving offenders thus I will excuse ye. Thou dost love her because thou knowest I love her. And for my sake even so doth she abuse me, suffering my friend for my sake to approve her. If I lose thee, my loss is my love's gain, and losing her, my friend hath found that loss. Both find each other, and I lose both twain, and both for my sake lay me on this cross. But here's the joy, my friend and I are one. Sweet flattery, then she loves but me alone. Threading culture through Shakespeare, I confront my inheritance, misgiven. Not all my grief is languaged, yet it may be said, this locution grieves. I am daughter of tides of war, really tides of merchant ships, same thing. The map the British desired continues to fold my wailing into itself. I have no chief to nation my loss. My fragile genealogy proves that the powerful teach themselves memory only when memory affirms royalty. My blood's a vintage of offenders and the abused, a line of white cells sexed with cursed bloody red. My father's people vaunted crosses they held over heads. My mother's subjected to Britain's Guyanese system, whether Negro or Hindu, they knelt to Westminster. I love the root of language and its forms, even if my psyche gacks their nerves' responsive conditioning to snobbish English. Amerindian Carib sounds survive in me, tones nuff be ringing my head steady, nah? Flickers of intimate contact of bodies, of origins, etymology, still exist as me, liking a voice that sounds so. My ancestry will disappear into what's over whenever I finally lose the memory game. That loss will seal my colonial version's gain, and losing that version of myself white friends hated shamefacedly will compound that loss. But through this appropriate voice, we find each other, angry and guilty, oppressed and bossy, the twains that my hindbrain, tongue-tied, stomachs. For memory's sake, I lay agriculture on memory's thespian scripture. Goldsmiths brutalize the generative spirit. They jack unproperty. Their unmemory frames the digital endless as tone-deafly as Saartjie Baartman was framed by Dr. Dunlop. Won't it be sweet flattery when they turn their smart machines on me? Shakespeare will forever sub-utter my restated colonial legacy. So the rest of them, I promise you, there's a Shakespeare sonnet in there, like you said. There is one cheat. There's one place I figured if anybody ever does this book as a thesis and goes deep enough, there is an Easter egg where I didn't do part of it for a reason. But who knows? Posterity? Okay. So So Margaret, you'd mentioned that you were interested in this one. It is 49. I saw Tanya Tagaq in concert and was just blown away. And yeah, so this is about that. Whoa. Tanya Tagaq's instance. Tanya Tagaq breathes as tone time come. Epiglottal linguish. She these under affects. With a hissly vocal, she heaves her breath, an I to that auditory body. Cardiovascular respects a guttural at yuma come well at strangled lyric, past strangled scarce. Screely with and throat sung with energy, whooshed the strict Brit thing a whoosh aha amid sun's professionalized gurg. Subtler languages, extractive logic. Tanya Tagaq orchestral, symphonic, the vein system with inbreathed of mining, outbreathed of tundra, self-preservation and chthonic ian. Flesh, brain-semmed, self, uproars, ear-throat, cunnilingual unword. Industrial in song's tonalpathy, punk arctic. To sound like a wolverine, like a porpoise, thrum in the throat. A sound, strength, a polar, whale cry in tonal convulsation with electronics. To me, Tagaq's ululates and the regenesis of Thanks. I was interested in how that would sound too. Yeah. Okay. So this one is it's a difficult thing for me to read, and I feel as though I am staying in my lane. And if there are people online who are like, Sonnet, you are not staying in your lane, please message me. You can find me on the internet. In the last 2 poems ago, you heard me say a voice that sounds so, and I'm sounding like my family there, right? And because this project is about bringing this body's experience and then thinking coloniality and thinking ancestry onto the page, I really wanted to get musicality and sound into this piece. And so, yeah, I don't, as you can hear, that my general way of speaking is like this, and I'm going to try and speak a little bit more like the people who brought me up, half of them anyway. This is 111. Hot form lady shake she donkey. Sweet brown sugar twist she behind. What for a tune, child, if not dancing? The mighty sparrow he make you wine. Little gal goddess done teeth men's eye. She got a roomful them peeping she backside. Hot heat spreading down onto she belly. Wet heat from her form make a boy loose tie. Female form provide the action. In public sweet men answer she smile. Child, public manners don't make body less round. Female body drive the dance hall while. How you come you sitting while your body so pum pum? Your nice Amerindian friend go come. She gives some back reason to dance. Dull puri patty and a bottle of rum. She danced to mighty Enchanta Dulari Betty. She swing to Aubrey Cummings' lead guitar. She danced to Colin Wharton. She worked the scenes. She liked the dum-dum dirty Tell Stars. Shanto song, body spirit of Guyana. Make the Indian tap and the white British mine. We no more under England rule of law. Down your colonialism, rattle you behind. Like a quay-quay's dance hall be jumping. Partiers plenty high wine will drink. Portions of chow mein, sauce and dumpling. Latrine steam kunksi ras strong stink. King Fighter, he bounced up with Lilian. Roaring Lion makes sly observation. Better not marry a pretty ass one. That girl will make you feel bitter union. Tick dunk woman, devour double and pepper. She dingole. She dance calypso and roll. If you're not direct, best expect correction. Pity men think she under boy control. Girlfriend, bacchanal does be bouncing your backside. You take your eye and pass me. River quarantine heart, your serpentine twine. Yes, enough to cuss. Remember who your ras be. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I can actually end there. That's one. Okay. I thought I started it. It's cool. One more? Sorry.
The problem is my phone's over there.
Your phone is here? Here, take a look. Just because I have no desire to like.
Go ahead.
I'll just one more. Okay. I'll end on one that thinks about relationality, voices of, because we go to 6:30, right? Yeah. Okay. Cool. Voices of the wood that we talked about, and yeah. Okay. So 126. Go into the forest. Sit under the Amazon canopy. Rain falls. Above the leafy cibos layered crowns echo. Rain hits the flying moss, thumps on the woody understory. Do trees have their own songs? Like birders intimate with species identifiable chickerlee, dendrologists can suss the tree's IDs from sonic data, says Haskell. Different shapes of leaf produce different whispers or thwacks. Different branchy frameworks sway trees' resonatings. Go out, pour attention willingly onto ears, and learn to harvest sound, is a quote. Repeat your attention. Show the forest the sensibility you show lovers. With time, soon each tree rings to patient listeners its pithy, sweet song. Relationally, forests grow. Such a thing as individual is foreign to this nature. Sovereignty is only meaningful to the system entire. What then is sovereign to our internetworked frack? Galliano has faced the scorn of colleagues for listening to Zia maize, to the corn plant's growing baby roots. Those loud clicks, acoustic emissions, are incidental, say stalwarts. They're just a mechanical result of plant bubbles crackling in their tissue. But Galliano suspects the sound spikes are like talk. She keeps heeding the call of green things, avowing that they purr with sensible purpose, trusting that her ecologist skill may in time divulge the obscenities and graces of plant discourse. Water etches sound into biome. Is it only fauna that hears? Kind listening kind, possible yet feared, without ears, the outside hears. Earth, earth, earth. A balsam fir zings and tinks as chickadees raise cones of their purple scales. Its verdure converses with vapor. An olive's branch extends over human military detonations, breathing dust and curling into itself. The scientist will keep, while hearing trash talk, measuring the unheard of auditory knack of green peas. Through desiccated soil, they foray toward water held in pipes, answering the sound of moving water without ever tasting its moisture. Vibes. Plants. Sounding the nervous quiet of us, bodies, phytosentient. O, render xylem phonetics their flow. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonnet. That was amazing. What a great selection from 154 poems that you could have chosen. What a beautiful, sort of array of tactics and approaches. That was really fantastic. I'm just going to introduce Nicole. Nicole Raziya Fong is a poet and painter living in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. Her work seems to delimit and reconstruct immaterial ampules of psychic experience, coaxing the incorporeal into inhabiting a more muscular physique. She is the author of OЯACULE and Perfect, also from Talon Books in 2019, the Chapbook 7 series, iterated by Color from Hiding Press last year, and Fargon, Poetry Will Be Made by All from 2014. Nicole has also composed visual work for the collaborative chapbook Leguminosae Delusion Athletics with text by Andy Martrich in the Blasted Tree from this year. Her writing has appeared in various publications, including Social Text, the Capilano Review, Filling Station, the Volta, and Carte Blanche, and has been translated into Swedish and French. And I'm so excited to hear Nicole read from this beautiful, mysterious, rather incantatory text, OЯACULE. So please help me welcome Nicole Raziya Fong. Are you okay holding the mic? Yes? Okay. You can use the Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret, and Green College for inviting me and holding the space to have these amazing conversations we've been having over the past 2 days on these embodied enactments that can be taken off the page and embodied enactments. So I'm really excited to be reading the work in the spirit of orality and incantation, and also to have the space after to stage a vocalized performance from the book. So OЯACULE is a theatrical book consisting of discrete characters and a narrative whose directive rationale remains for the most part slightly obscure and concealed. The book considers the malleability of memory and the force a subjective eye might enact upon it as being the very narrative context which propels it. So the sonic effects of repetition and song within serve to disorient rather than contain the narrative within it. So I was thinking a little bit more about the canon and these kind of how one situates the self in relation to a tradition that excludes one from it. So in OЯACULE, I'm considering the form of the epic and the tragic form, and specifically thinking about Homer's Odyssey, which is riddled with the language of domination and power, an exchange of goods, people, and land as currency. Odysseus in the midst of his journeying to his home, which may or may not exist, and the very fact that he once had a home. The Greek epic tells a story in the context of space. A hero journeys in order to recover some aspect of himself, moving through a physical landscape that bends between the fantastical and the real, but is given consistency through the formulaic nature of the epic. There's an idea that the events that occur within this pattern can be knowable, and once known, that the world can follow some sort of logical, perceptible rhythm knowable from the outside. So, of course, this is a really colonial conception of the functioning of time. I see OЯACULE as a rewriting of the Western canon, responding maybe to Aristotle's concept of tragedy, which has much to say about both space and character. For Aristotle, fate is something that is internal to the character, something predetermined, an inevitable fact of the character. In Aristotle, for example, Medea's apparent choice in murdering her children would actually be something that rises from within her, some intrinsic trait, thus negating the seeming autonomy of that choice. So the very tragic form has something to say about the unification of space and the intrinsic notion of character. So I see OЯACULE as an investigation into how one might gain autonomy from such a form, as its characters grapple with fate and the seeming circularity to memory, grappling with being trapped within the work while constantly trying to escape it. So for me, this is a struggle that has a lot to do with knowledge. My interest in specifically Plato's Theaetetus, being concerned with the search for what is true and how to identify it. Plato's Theaetetus gives us a way to determine the true outside of the apparent, Socrates functioning as the midwife of knowledge, bringing about some sort of accurate perception through the engagement of dialogue. So one must search. This is the journey the characters in OЯACULE are all engaged in. So there are many instances of some sort of illusory movement towards knowledge within, as these characters struggle with fate, memory, dream, and the movement of time. So the book itself contains a false ending, the exile of the momentary I from memory itself. However, it doesn't end there and instead continues on to actually draw from Sonnet's text. When I arm myself with rationality, realism chases me into myth. That really stood out to me. And Pasolini, only he who is mythical is realistic. What could be more subversive than the survival against fate's ruling of the heroine? So I thought I'd read a bit from the book. The book consists of the dialogue between the characters of heroine, child, maternal love, and luminous, who is a star. The sung engagements of a chorus and an anti-chorus, and lyrical dream segments spoken by the character Luminous, which is the only place where she speaks through direct address. So I'll read a bit from one such dream segment. I hope that wasn't too, good. Oops, sorry. She dreams upon 15 stages. Burn, stage 1. A silver field. The ambiguous, light-refracting quality of silver is regurgitated by the severity of a world's proximate distance. Luminous. I lost your name, deeply burnished, threaded in vermeil, muscularly complete, an articulate field, responsive. This is the futurity of my discourse. You saw me fade from the world, and as I faded, you faded too. We faded from the world with great acuity an unprecedented insight. It was our future. You saw me there. Deeply withheld image bound to a storm, stage 2. The disastrous progression of logic displays its portraits against a blank wall. The images expires as one passes. As of yet, one remains incapable of moving backwards in the passageway. Luminous. In a deeply withheld beauty, rubbed raw, burnished beyond resemblance, fallen between decisive agonies of loneliness, retraction, separation, through repealed distances we became unable to circumvent, not even in dream wherein the same passage became replicated, to have thought it could be navigated with the same freedom and irreverence, falsity. Even in the dream, unable to become fully convinced by a deeply withheld spontaneity, the referencing of this occurrent dream, if this passage arose, had arisen. Certitude is the silver of water between mountains, stage 3. A luminous hall of dolls and apology. Luminous. A glass margin has enveloped me with gradation. In the gradual despondency of your title, you had needed to oppose me with your silence, your own unaware dullness, a sensuality, formulaic. A faded star is an initial ambiguity, belated. A faded star alters its surface with abundance. Within the gradual, deteriorating light, coeval upon leaves, I insisted, this is good earth, as it had been. I insisted the limpidity of this margin not to be confused with transparency, nor the limpidity of this margin be refused. Each day ending in gradation and severity, stage 4. As though the shores established at the boundary of memory had been rinsed, disinfected, sands free of debris replete. This perfection procedurally marred at the edges, beyond which a matted logic of seagrass, shells, and cigarettes maintain. Systematic. Luminous. In the oceanic seeming of continuance, I lost my name, salient. Beneath your name, its tenor and sustaining mystery, each day within this garden, evolving, each day in endless resolve, in vital lending, in the given formlessness of becoming, I searched. In damaged fountains of creation, I found there every lasting notion, retrieval, salience. Experientially, stage 5. A greenhouse, glass walls, a single white bird cage and a chair. Luminous. Meekly, by which I had undone the vast fascination by which I would come to know, experientially, of a kind of death offering me something life hadn't, perhaps a level of solitude that, after returning to an albeit incompletion in life, would be enviously drawn to the non-solitary. That death might have something to offer beyond this complete ownership I continued to doubt. But think, to confiscate the dying of an individual has yet to be done. What kind of subversion could manage to surpass such a limit, this absolute limit, for an individual's passage from the world of confluence, continuity, along a lived-in perpetuity, What could ever surpass this? And vanishes. Stage 6. A stage illuminated. A stage cast in neutrality. A possible chair therein. Luminous. So the earth's secrecy then be concluded through striations of event, vanishing into parsed collusion, cause and alterity, by which the earth, acting accordingly, might speak of precedent hesitation, coming to characterize the nature of its regret through proximity. The futurity of my discourse bends and vanishes. You wanted the world to die in you. Did the door open? You wanted this excision to fade. Did the door open? This desirous implication concedes. Didn't you see yourself opening the door? Your world in this impossible collusion of forms. The door was already open. This is my discourse. Of lilies, stage 7. A pond, perhaps on a smaller scale, a drainage chute. If all are present, each must account its waters to the original source with regularity. Luminous. Preceding you, death is what I strew, death was yours to despise. In a decisive agony of lilies, divine galleries of deathless flora, divinities. Death is what was sown in the fragile, lived summary of exterior, in melodic galleries of antecedents. But this is something to be certain of. As the meek bridge mentioned, something would have had to come before, had made me awaken to this bent world. It was, effectively, yours to despise. And from these seeds, a consensual format arose, as from beneath, a figure renewed, a figure filled, established in a gradient of color, a figure written under duress, numb figure, unable to body sensation. Such a dull figure of chance she, this figure, is. For certain, the memory's figure is at fault, but all else remains intact. If anything, she is formidable and born from a consensual seed. Areas of effortless affront upon the same ashen stage of occurrence. Stage 8. Delivery room. Hardwood is being applied by men whose faces remain indistinct. Gypsum alienates the mouth. Luminous. This dream won't allow my tenderness. What should I do? Won't accept any unbelonging moment undesired, whose restless anteriority replies across the marooned instance of its divide. Spectral confidences across thatched, sunlit surfaces, a tinned sound of spectrality. From the tireless lane bordered in lilies, a sensual format arose. The tireless lane bordered in lilies and their relevant disclosures therein. Extract the bridge from the swerving materiality, divide it. Blank filigree gloves of intent, stage 9. These mortal changes of law, adrift in a thought or a dream. Luminous. Dear, how shall I proceed in this unmitigated forgiveness? This longing for renewal bends me. I am an opal desirousness under tension. This longing for renewal spites me. Oh, I can't tell you how I suffer. And yet, a continually forgiven dream reunites me with a salvation that threatens to absolve me from you. how I've suffered. From all that is risen upon this articulate weave, I sign to you, dear, uncontested flesh, your memory is still my incomplete dream. You must know it. Doing okay for time? Okay. I misremembered. Stage 10. A catalyst accounts for change. Luminous. As for how the whining garden expelled me, I misremembered. I had found a new home in repellent gardens of wasted foliage. Alongside evidence of a lifelong tendency towards preservation, I wasted new seeds beneath fragile ground, insisted the ground was good. The ground was good, repealing stones of unmitigated beginnings as I had manifested my escapism in stolen agony. For now, death is in your hands, death's hands. Potential clarifications. Stage 11. A looking without object. Appearance is cast in mystery, surface, gauze. Luminous. I.e., the sensual chatter of assent, i.e., the manner by which the inevitable would replicate itself, envious of the singularity it was composed of, wherein dying houses being, but is not a home. I told myself, without conviction, depicting myself in a series of interchanges, all having the potential to confuse negation with assent, all having the potential to clarify, i.e., the shattered glass of a tinted sky, i.e., the particular darkening of this day, i.e., the dark breakage of this day, i.e., the tinted exhaustion of the sky, wherein this beauty has been cast afield. Stage 12. The derailed permissiveness of an unknotted carpet. As of yet, one remains incapable of moving backwards in the passageway. Luminous. In a deeply withheld beauty, rubbed raw, burnished beyond resemblance, fallen between decisive agonies of loneliness, retraction, separation. Through repealed distances we became unable to circumvent, not even in dream. Not even in dream wherein the same passage became replicated. To have thought it could be navigated with the same freedom and irreverence, falsity. Even in the dream, we were unable to become fully convinced in a deeply withheld spontaneity in the dream if this passage arose, had arisen. As news of the spectacle reached me, I returned my face to a semblance of desire so as not to be expelled from the whining garden. Stage 13. The cold breeze of climate discolors an interior. We are not remiss to mention the remoteness of this enormity. Solidity encounters a breeze now rid of exterior. The breeze transcribed now acts as a measure of resemblance. The breeze now beneath itself, now possessive of reassurance, now cooling to the brow, a relief. The breeze turns into memory, is replete. The breeze turns into a fold, is replete. Luminous. In spectacle, the news reached me. An agony of filaments edited their limit beneath the cold sun, becoming legible as exterior, in the sense that they concealed me in defaced proximity. I could read appearance into a defiance of extent, In a sense, I could not doubt the true secrecy of its decay. This corner of discourse decried willingly, I believed in it so tryingly. Buried in lilies I was, their defeated accumulations a particulate wrath, and bruised the setting hue of my skin, a desperate claws defaced, and their desperate stamens strewn. It is not within my tendency to move negligently through storms of appearance. Stage 14. A picture has been relegated to a corner beyond which encounter establishes a code. The present container of identity repents. The present container of identity is a traversable scale. As image resolves through chemical fluidity, so the face devolves into action. A picture has now been established. Luminous. If I felt there might have been before me, there might have been no there. In actuality, the was a picture I had seen accidentally. The was a picture, and I was there also in the picture, and what I remembered of the scene was not present in that moment, and therefore had no relevance to the picture. When I look at the picture, what I see is that there is someone there in the picture, and then after that person, there is an there. I feel that this might be in the picture, or it might be in me, and the person in the picture also. She might be in or she might be in me. A moment belied. Stage 15. The rising of an operatic stage. Appearance renews its contract with illusion. Visible, a hem of raw silk, its chemical perplexity establishing a growth of mouth or eyelid or cheekbone. Luminous. The disappearance of an elliptical nerve in daylight, that such unawareness might pause in the shade of its useless unbecoming, casting the tenor of continuance upon exterior. Chance disallowed an imitative pulse, across whose wideness emerged an enraged state of dereliction. Now, this defenseless change softens and repeals impossible theatrics. Risking territory or response, rain. Rain as it fell with a more distinct forgiving. Rain is where I found my name beneath increasing accumulations of water, and lost my name once more. Thank you so much.
Sit down. Yes, please do. Wasn't that beautiful? I'm so struck by how long it has been since any of us have been together listening to poetry. And it's so moving simply to have a space in real time that also allows us all to be in long time together, where we listen together into texts that are complicated, driven, highly individualist, and full of subjectivity. I'm extremely moved and so grateful, Mark, to you and Meredith and Peter, to the chance to bring us all together into a space where we could hold these texts aloft. So, first of all, just thank you very much. I'd like everyone to give both another hand. to thank for the readings. We can listen online. We can stay up till 4 a.m. and gather things from social media. But this experience of just being in a space together is really the materiality of writing itself. And the presence of your voices is it's just entirely different being together. So we have a short amount of time, and instead of me conducting things, I would like to ask if anyone here has a particular question that they would like to raise and ask Nicole or Sonnet or both to address, since we've all been in this listening. And if so, I'll pass you the mic so that people online can hear us. Yes? Anyone? Okay, Mark?
If only to give other people time to think and articulate more interesting interventions. Very interested by the staging, as it were, to pick up your word, stage 2, stage 15. I couldn't tell because I'm only listening and don't have the pages. How equal the stages or unequal they might be. Whereas with sonnet Shakespeare, I have a sense that, as with Shakespeare's sonnets, the modules are, broadly speaking, commensurate with each other. There's the space of each page, like the space of the 14 lines. There's a box with a certain constraining quality about it. I'd just be curious to get a little more of a sense of how this aspect of modularity, of staging, of the kind of cumulative poetic that you both seem to be practicing, how that actually relates to anything that you think about. Incantatory recomposition already suggests there will be a kind of cyclical or repetitive structuring, and I guess everybody felt, certainly I felt, as each of you wove your spells from the podium, that we were being worked upon in a kind of cyclical and modular, and I won't say relentless, but there was a kind of mounting pressure in the way these verbal artifacts were working on us. A kind of urgency, really very dramatic and intense and occasionally spiking in Sonnet's performance, but slower burning and yet still very intense in a kind of relentless way in yours, Nicole. Can you say anything about what's going on there that would be more interesting than this? Yeah, you don't want to keep that.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I thought about this a lot in relation to Sonnet's text, who is using like the structure of the sonnet and going in and like doing an alteration within and breaking it open like that, where my work, I see it as like an emanation almost of a dramatic, like something that is like hovering above this a dramatic form, And the repetition and the circularity definitely is like a really important part to all of OYAACULE, which is like characters who are constantly sort of treading the same ground, trying to end up somewhere new, but generally just sort of ending up where they began and needing to go on the same route. And this is like expressed through language, and like there's like 2 repeating segments in what I just read. I don't know if anyone noticed that, but just like in like a repeating dream, like something that can't be escaped or really affected with change as much as the characters try. Or the change isn't the change that is needed. So, yeah, like it's like this sort of false movement or false journeying that is directionless. And within the book, repetition like comes up in many different forms throughout to indicate this. I don't know how you see the usage of repetition. Does that answer the question? Do you want to speak to that?
I also, it's an opportunity, this question, to comment, because I found listening to the words stage, and being invited to think of a stage that's not a stage, and like luminous, I don't know if you meant this, like I'm just trying to picture light itself speaking bodilessly, like both emanating and resonating and being a wave, and then I'm like, okay, so my mind wants to grasp at the image of a space, but then it was like the poetry constantly teases that out and says, oh, I bet you're trying to make it into a space, and I will just do that over and over again. So I really appreciated, if that's a fair experience of it. So I really appreciated that. I think your question makes me think about how when I was doing this, I was like, whoa, over and over, I'm doing the same thing in a way. But Shakespeare did it over and over. And he really did not vary his theme as much as I did. Like, I was getting bored with the same theme over and over again, and so I just tried to mix it up a bit more. And as far as the space is concerned, I was thinking, okay, if there's a spatial dimension to it, it's that where one meets Shakespeare, I want to be there. Hi, like, and so whenever I hear now that a Shakespeare prof brings my work in to just give some context to even like modern adaptations or responses or whatever, I'm like, bonus, then I did it. Like, that voice is now in the space of Shakespeare.
Nicole, you read mostly from one sequence in your book, and there are quite a few other series within the book, several of which are dramatic scenes with the dramatis personae that you've developed. And I wondered how it is that these very different modalities sit together in the book. I think it was quite an odd mix of very different kinds of writing that allows us, access to very different subjectivities in relation to the characters, and then in relation to this, this being, Luminous, who is written in the first person. So there's this remarkable energy that does beam out from Luminous. I guess it's a question about how you structured the entire book. Whereas with Sonnet's project, it was kind of like, there's going to be 154 pieces and they're all going to, that's going to be the book. But yours has a kind of diversity in it that I'd like to hear your thoughts on.
Yeah, so the book is actually, the section I read is basically in a lineated poetic form. And So the book has moments of dialogue between these characters, the dramatis personae. And interspersed are kind of, I see it as like a chorus, anti-chorus interaction where each voice is sort of fragmented by the other. I find it's hard to explain without it being seen. There's like a physical separation of a speaking by basically a interjecting internal voice in the center. So there's speaking that occurs and is interrupted, but can be read in various ways. Like, I see it as like there's a vertical reading and a horizontal reading of this interrupted voice, and then a cohesive, lineated, like lyric voice speaking in the center. So most of the book is like is an interchange between like moments of dialogue, these interactions between chorus and anti-chorus, and then these dreams of the character Luminous, where within the dialogue, Luminous never speaks directly as the other characters do. Luminous speaks in sort of abstracted actions, like stage directions, or speaks abstractly from a different plane. But in the dream segments, Luminous speaks in a cohesive lyric voice. So there are these segments of these dream segments that are more like a cohesive lyric voice where Luminous speaks. It's quite a textural, complex. Like the composition was very. I've been interested in visual work more recently, and I see it and I conceive of it in a very like physical way, almost like these motions of text and their arrangement in relation to, in relation to each other. Does that make? Is this?
Could a sculpture come out of this book?
I see it like I don't. See this? I see it as like the sculpture. Yeah, it could be.
An opera, I would say. With
Yeah,
installation, dancers,
like emanating voices. Just weird. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sort of explicating more about the diverse form of the book. Tonight, what we're going to do from between 8 and 9 o'clock. And I hope that you can all stay. We have a reception that immediately follows our time here over in Graham House, which is just across the way, that way, yes, where there's a reception with wine and nibbles, and then a little break for dinner. But between 8 and 9, we have an extension of this event where the polyvocal capacity of Nicole's work will be translated into 4 voices. We'll be doing about a 20-minute presentation of some of the dramatic texts using layers of voices and experimenting and exploring that polyvocal oral capacity of the text. And Sonnet, who has a brilliant, not only brilliant lyric poetry practice, but a beautiful lyric singing songwriting practice, is going to be playing music and singing her own compositions in Graham House, and just the relationship between your poetry and perhaps I could just ask you perhaps for a comment around how your life now as a singer-songwriter, which sort of is an extension of poetic lyric practice, how that feels, how these two practices operate for you as a creative person?
When I first decided that I would pick up the guitar and try to learn it, so I've been at the guitar now for 3 years and singing for 3 years, and I really could not sing 3 years ago at all. So when I picked up a book by David Byrne. Remember David Byrne, Talking Heads? He's got a book called, I think it's How Music Works, or something like that, big thick book. And he talked about how music depends on its context. And I think that's part of what I'm experiencing is, I live in Nanaimo, and it's very hard to bring poetry into so many contexts there. It's like the context for it to land is not there. So I've created a way to voice things such that it can be snuck into like dive bar open mics. But at the same time, I'm still like conversant with galleries and like thinking about eco-poetics and thinking about my own, like I still live in the same body that came up with this, right? I can't leave all of those thoughts behind. So I'm like, wow, this song does one thing in a gallery, and then I play the same song at the bar, and it's just doing different work. So I'm just really interested in that work. And like when I was rehearsing over in the room over there, I'm like, wow, it's going to do different work again because this is a different academic context, and I used to live here, and so it's just a trip the whole time. That's my really sophisticated way to tell you how it is. But yeah, it's been great.
It's a stage, one of your many stages.
I guess it's the blue period or the blues period.
Yes.
I'm afraid we can't host people for dinner unless they're already checked in. So if you want to linger until 8 o'clock, make sure you get to the Tuesday practice before everybody else. If you're not, you can get for dinner. Maybe that'll work for you. We'll take the books over too, because these are handsome books, as you would expect. And if you'd like to ride them, I think for ready money they can be had.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Why don't we bring the books over to the Graham House piano lounge, and you can have a look and converse more with Sonnet and Nicole, and we can, have fun. Thank you all for coming. It's been a joy to be able to present tonight, and thank you so much, Sonnet and Nicole. Yes.